Today we're going to talk about how fractions and division go hand in hand. Because whenever you are making a fraction, you're actually dividing a whole into pieces, which dividing is division, the process of division. So let's look at an example. It says, how can you divide 2 muffins among 3 people equally? And then it also says, what fraction shows the part of 1 muffin each person gets? Well, we need to look at this in several different ways. We need to think about that there's 2 muffins, and that's why I've drawn 2 separate circles to represent the 2 muffins. And then it said to divide it among 3 people equally. So I took each muffin and I divided it into 3 pieces. Now, if I have 3 people, I'm going to pass out 1 muffin to each person. So the first person, second person, and the third person. And then I've got another muffin, so that first person gets another piece, the second person gets another piece, and the third person gets another piece. So person number 1 gets how much of this 1 muffin? Well, he got 1 piece, and there were a total of 3 pieces. So I divided this 1 whole into 3 pieces. So he gets 1/3 of that muffin. So if he gets 1/3 of that muffin, total he's getting 2/3 because he got 2 pieces out of a muffin that was cut up into thirds. So that's just a quick example of dividing wholes into pieces, which is the fraction process, which is division. Now, when we see a fraction like 2/5, a fraction is just a division problem. We could say that 2 divided by, so I'm going to make the little fraction bar, the divided by, and 5. So that is my fraction bar. I'm just replacing it so you can see. When I read a fraction, instead of saying 2/5, I know that it's 2 divided by 5. Another way to write that is just 2 divided by 5. So this represents the same thing. And if we were writing it in our traditional division way, we would say 2 divided by 5. Well, that looks weird to me because that's not what we're used to seeing. I am, but you're not. Whenever we have a bigger number going to a smaller number, we're looking at a fraction, which is also going to result in a decimal. Decimals and fractions are interchangeable. If you have a fraction and you do the division, the result is going to be decimal. And let me show you how that works. If I have this 2/5 and I do 2 divided by 5, watch what happens on the screen. I get a decimal. A calculator is not going to report a fraction to you. It's going to report a decimal. So 2/5 is the exact same thing as 4/10. They look different, but they represent the same fractional piece. 2/5 and 4/10 is the exact same thing. And the reason I said 4/10 is because this is in the tenths place. The reason we want to be able to take fractions and turn them into decimals is because decimals are so much easier to work with. Let's look at a couple more just to play around with calculator. If you have one at home, you could play around with it as well. Let's say I have the fraction 1/8. So let's do that into our calculator, clear it out. 1 divided by 8. And there is our decimal. So 1/8 is equivalent to 125 thousandths because tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So you can just play with this. Later on in 6th grade, you're going to learn how to actually divide these out to get the decimal instead of having to use a calculator. But I want you just to play around and see how you can take the fraction form, make it a division problem. Make that bar say divided by 2 divided by 5, and the result will be a decimal. We are going to be dealing with, in our next video, tenths, hundredths, and thousandths. We're very familiar with those with our place value. And we could look at 1/10 and turn that into a decimal super easy without even having to use that calculator. I say 1/10, so I write 1/10. That's my tens place. I put 1 in there. So we're going to do a little bit more with that in our next video. But for now, I just need you to remember that a fraction is a division problem because you're taking a whole and dividing it into pieces. And when we have fractions and do that division, we are getting a decimal because decimals and fractions are interchangeable. So decimals and fractions represent the same thing, parts of wholes. A decimal is a part of a whole, a fraction is a part of a whole, and decimals are just easier to work with.